Hello to you newcomers and welcome back, my lovely subscribers. This is Big Baby Props and I'm the Big Baby. I got another helmet build tutorial for you guys. Today it's going to be the Desert Wolffe Helmet as seen in the Clone Wars TV show. Unfortunately, we only briefly get to see this helmet in 1 or 2 episodes, but I was able to have it modeled, printed, and now I'm going to show you guys how to finish it. If you guys own a 3D printer and want to complete this project yourself, be sure and check out the link in the description to the 3D print files. If you guys don't own a 3D printer and want to complete this project, also check out the description for a link to my shop online where I sell the original 3D printed parts that we begin with. Now let's get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to have to do is assemble this bad boy. For that we're going to need a few supplies. One, I have a sandpaper pad glued down to a flat wooden board. This is going to give us a nice flat sanding surface to make sure all our edges are as flush as they can be. We've also got some cyanoacrylic superglue as well as some Gorilla Glue. As always, I like to keep my soldering iron handy to melt together the pieces for a superior hold. Now like I said, we're going to start out by sanding all of the edges that need to be glued together. This is going to do a few things for us. One, it's going to get rid of any large pieces that might be blocking the pieces from fitting together. 2, it's going to roughen up the surface a little bit, and it's going to help our cyanoacrylic glue cure a lot faster and hold a lot better. After we're done sanding, simply apply a few drops of the cyanoacrylic glue along the seam of the parts you want to glue together. Now this glue does cure pretty quickly, but you might have to hold it with your hands for a few seconds. Next, I go along the inside of the helmet, melting the seams with my soldering iron to hold it on the inside. After that, I follow everything up with the Gorilla Glue to really bring it all together. I'm going to be leaving the back half of the face detached. That's because the head hole for this helmet is a bit too small for my huge head. So we're going to be doing something really cool later on down the road, but for now, just leave it detached. Now, as with all my helmets, the first step is to get rid of the 3D printer lines. For this, I like to use a product called Rust-Oleum Filler Primer. It's like a really thick spray paint. Comes out, it's going to work its way into those 3D printer lines, and then after it's dried we'll be able to sand it down to a nice smooth finish. Now you can see me working outside as well as wearing lung protection. This stuff does kind of smell bad, so you'll probably want to do the same. I apply 3 to 4 really heavy layers of this stuff. It doesn't really matter if it runs or streaks or anything like that, since we're going to be sanding it all away anyway. So don't be afraid to lay it on pretty heavy. You also don't have to get every printer line on this step. This is just an easy way to cover up about 80% of the printer lines. We're going to follow it up with another product which will fill in the rest of the lines for us. So after 3 to 4 heavy coats of this, we'll move on to the next product. Now that the filler primer is dried, we can use our next product, which is called Bondo Glazing and Spot Putty. This stuff is like a kind of red toothpaste that after half an hour to an hour, it will harden up and then we'll be able to sand it down, just like the filler primer. The difference is this stuff is a lot thicker and a lot easier to apply to one specific area. So instead of using like 3 or 4 cans of filler primer trying to fill in some of those higher print lines, we're just going to use Bondo. Again, be sure and wear some lung protection for this because it does smell bad. Also, if you're applying it with your finger like me, you're obviously going to want to wear some gloves. Apply this stuff all around the rest of the helmet. Wherever you see a printer line showing, apply some Bondo. This stuff is a really good catch-all for any printer lines that the filler primer missed. The filler primer and Bondo are going to work great for the face pieces because there's a lot of detail involved in them. For the top dome of the helmet, we're going to be using a different method since there aren't many details associated with it. We can use a quicker and simpler method to get the same results. As you can see, we've got the top dome here all glued together, and now we're going to apply something called Bondo fiberglass resin. It comes in a 2-part mixture. One is the main resin, the other is a small bottle full of liquid hardener. You pour out some resin, put a few drops of the liquid hardener in it, mix it together, and after half an hour to an hour, it'll act sort of like the Bondo and really harden up. The thing about this though is it's easier to mix larger portions than Bondo, and it's kind of easier to apply. You can see we just used a very cheap chip brush. This thing was seriously like 50 cents. Don't use a very nice paintbrush on this because once the resin hardens in your bristles, your paintbrush will be useless. So be sure and use a paintbrush that you don't really like. Now like I said earlier, we're going to be using this method because it's a lot easier to cover a large surface area with this stuff than with Bondo or filler primer. This is the same stuff that I used to smooth out my clone trooper armor since there's not a lot of details that we're worried about filling in. So after you've mixed the resin and liquid hardener together, just apply it all over the helmet with the paintbrush. You typically only need to do 2 layers at maximum if you're applying it well enough around the helmet. You might want to wait an hour or so between coats though, for the resin to really harden up before you apply the next coat. So now that we've got the printer lines all filled, our next step is going to be sanding. So sanding is going to be the most difficult part of this whole process. It can be time consuming and it can take a lot of effort, but it'll be worth it by the time we're done. As you can see, I've got a few materials with me. I've got a mouse sander, a microfiber cloth, some 150 grit sandpaper, and then some 300 grit sandpaper. Now, the top dome is coated with our fiberglass resin. This stuff, you're gonna need a powered sander to sand down. It is really hard and very difficult to sand off with your hand. So I use a very low grit sandpaper pad attached to this thing. I mean, it's like 60 grit. It's really tough stuff. And it was taking me some real effort to sand it down. So I would strongly advise not doing this part by hand. The face and the back of the face are a little bit simpler. We're gonna go over them with the mouse sander once, just to kind of get some of the rough stuff off and save ourselves some sanding time. After that though, switch over to the 150 grit sandpaper and follow up anything that the mouse sander missed. After that, I move up to 300 grit sandpaper to really smooth it all out and prepare it for painting. Now by the end of this process, you should have a fully smoothed helmet that you're comfortable with. You shouldn't be able to see any printer lines, and it should look exactly like the Clone Trooper helmet you're going for, minus the paint. So if you need to redo the filler primer, Bondo, or fiberglass steps, that's perfectly okay. Trust me guys, having patience with it and persistence will pay off when we look at our final product. So once you have your fully smoothed helmet, we can start painting. Now obviously, all Clone Trooper helmets, or most of them anyway, start with a white base coat. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna apply a flat white base coat in very light coats. If there are any streaks or runs at this point, you're gonna have to wait for them to dry and then sand them down smooth, because we cannot tolerate any streaks or runs at this point, or moving forward. So take your time, don't get in a rush, and we'll be just great. Now Wolffe probably has the most complicated paint job of all the clone commanders. So look up some reference images, get some painter's tape, and load up some Netflix while you tape out the paint design that we're going for. Now that we've got the white base coat down, we can start to get really freaky with the paint job and do some really cool effects. So check out this tape job guys. It is definitely one of the most involved ones I've ever done, but it's going to look amazing by the time we're done. As a side note, one of the benefits of using our fiberglass resin is that it makes the helmet pieces pretty dang strong, as you see here when I let it fall off the table. So now that we've got the paint job in place, we're going to be applying something called liquid latex. It's used in movies and practical effects for things like, I don't know, zombie makeup or things like that. We're going to be applying it in places around the helmet to give us a nice chipped paint look. What's going to happen is it comes out as a liquid, and after about half an hour it will kind of like rubber up and turn to what we know as latex. After that, we'll paint on our gray color. Once that's dried, we can peel off the latex with our finger, revealing the white paint underneath, and it's really going to help us give the impression that the paint is chipped from wear or damage, and it's really going to add to the weathering effect that we're going to be adding later. Like I said, wait about half an hour for your latex to dry, and then we can apply the gray. So as you can see, our latex has turned kind of a nasty looking yellow color, but that means that we're ready for painting. I'm going to be applying just a flat gray primer. Now similar to the white base coat, take it easy, do some light coats. We can't have any runs or streaks, especially now that we have the tape down. Just be sure and get full coverage, and once your paint's dried, we can move on to the most satisfying part of the whole process, peeling off the tape and revealing the amazing design that we have worked so hard towards. Let's get to it. So this is going to be some great stuff guys. The Wolffe has the most intricate design out of all the commanders, so this is going to feel the best when you're peeling it off. My advice is to take it slow. Don't peel off the tape too fast or you might peel up some of the paint underneath. Plus it's a lot more satisfying when you peel slow and enjoy it. Now this is also the time to rub off the latex with your finger, so be sure and look around the helmet for any bumpy or lumpy spots where you put down your latex and just rub it off. Now this helmet is way too clean to be from the desert, so the next few steps are going to be to roughen it up, make it look like it's actually been somewhere. Now the weathering process I use is pretty simple, but also pretty effective. You're going to need a sponge brush, a cup filled with a little bit of water, some black acrylic paint, and some paper towels. Gloves are also pretty nice. What we're going to do is we're going to mix a little bit of acrylic paint in with some water, and apply it across the helmet with our sponge brush. Now this is going to get black paint all over the helmet, but we're not going to leave it there. We're going to take some of our paper towels and begin wiping away some of the paint. Now, some of the paint will be left behind, but that is okay. One, it's going to stain the white paint just a little bit to give it that nice dirty look. And two, the black paint is going to work its way into the nooks and crannies of the helmet, and it won't get wiped away when we wipe off the rest of the paint, thus giving the illusion of wear by having the recessed areas a lot dirtier than the non-recessed areas. The great part about this process is that it can be just about anything you want it to be. You don't have to use black, you could use maybe a dark brown, a light brown, or any other color really, and you can use as much or as little paint as you like. The more paint you use, the greater the effect of the weathering is going to be. The less paint you use, the lighter your weathering effect is going to be. So it's kind of up to you where you want to fall in that range. You can also definitely go over the helmet with more than one coat if you feel like your paint mixture isn't quite dark enough as you'd like it to be. When wiping off the paint, be sure and wipe it off in short, random directions for greater realism. It doesn't look very realistic if you just have one great big smear of paint across the helmet. The short, random directions really make it look realistic. So this is really going to weather up the white paint. It's going to make it look a lot dirtier, but since the gray is so much darker than the white, it's kind of untouched by the black paint, so we're going to have to use another method to make it look worn. So now we're going to scuff up the gray paint, and for that we're going to use a very coarse 60 grit sandpaper. This is going to give us some nice scuff marks, scratches all around the helmet. We're going to apply it around the dome in a few places without trying to go overboard. Next we're going to apply it to the face, and this is where this technique really shines. We're going to sand off some of the paint along the hard edges of the helmet. If you look at some worn things in real life, this is how it happens. The paint along the edges is the first to get worn off and rubbed off. So doing this in a few tactical positions on the helmet is really going to help it look realistic. We're also just going to apply a few scratches around the face. Our helmet is almost finished. We have a few aesthetic things to take care of, but we're almost there. Now if you remember from earlier in the video, I talked about how we're leaving the front and the back detached for now because my head is too big for the hole. What we're going to be doing is using some magnets and this JB Weld steel stick putty to make the back detachable and reattachable. So along with the JB Weld steel stick, we've got some rare earth magnets and just some brownie paper. First what we're going to do is we're going to take just a few strips of duct tape and tape the helmet together. This is just going to hold it in place while we apply our magnets. So first we want to take part of our cooking sheet and slide it in between the two parts of the helmet. This is going to keep the two sides of the putty from sticking together, but it'll make sure that the magnets are flush together and fit together. So once you have the sheet in between the helmet pieces, put on some gloves and pinch off about a quarter to a half inch of the putty and start rolling. This stuff is kind of a built-in two-part mixture. It has a black interior and a gray exterior. Rub it together until they're pretty well mixed into a dark gray color. Once they're mixed together, pinch it in half and stick one end of the magnet in each side. Then we'll apply the putty on either side of the cooking sheet, letting the magnets snap together. After that, we'll press the putty into the side of the helmet, making sure to get as much surface area as we can. The more contact the putty has with the helmet, the better hold it's going to have. So as you can see, I got some putty stuck to the inside of the helmet on either side of the cooking sheet. After about an hour, this putty is going to become rock solid. After that, we'll be able to slide out our cooking sheet and the magnets will be stuck in the putty. Now we're going to do this in 3 other places along the seam to make sure we have the strongest connection possible. So now once the putty is hardened, we're ready to move on to the final step in the process. First, let's take a look at the magnet solution in action. I can tell you guys that this has got a pretty strong hold. It is definitely not going to just fall apart on me. I had to be careful not to snap some of my hair in between the magnets when I was putting it on. So lastly, we're going to need to put a visor on this thing. And for this, I'm just going to be using a very cheap mosquito net helmet. Now this stuff is pretty see-through with just one layer, but what we're going to do is we're going to cut out a section and layer it over itself about 4 times. It's really going to give the look of a visor, but we'll still be able to see through it. The best part is these things are like $1, so very affordable option. So just rough measure out how much netting you're going to need and multiply the height by around 4. After that, I just take a hot glue gun and glue the layered netting over the eye hole. We'll repeat it with the other side, and once that is finished, Congratulations guys, you have a completed Desert Wolffe helmet. Right now the dome just kind of sits on top of the face. I might have to come up with a different solution for that, but I'm happy with it as a display piece. Overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I worked closely with one of my favorite designers in getting this model commissioned, and I always love a unique clone trooper helmet, which this definitely is. Again, I'll be sure and link the 3D files in the description if you own a 3D printer and want to check this out. Again, if you guys don't own a 3D printer, check out my shop online. I do sell the raw 3D prints that we started with. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I hope that you're able to complete this project on your own. And as always, I hope to see you again next time.